Good afternoon. I want to welcome everybody to today's webinar entitled The Death of Cold Calling and the Advent of Marketing Assisted Selling. My name is Kevin Miller, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at Salesfusion, and it's my pleasure to speak to everybody today on this topic, which tends to raise a lot of interest level in how companies are dealing with some of the failings of cold calling as a lead generation tactic, and how companies are leveraging some of the newer technologies available through marketing automation and social media, etc., to improve, supplement, or even replace cold calling as a tactic altogether. Briefly about Salesfusion, before we get into the actual discussion itself, we are a marketing automation platform that supports both B2B and B2C environments. We have a focus as a company and a technology around lead management and helping companies integrate their marketing and sales. We do this by integrating our marketing automation platform to leading CRM systems such as Microsoft, Salesforce, Sugar, SalesLogix, and Sage. We have about 400 plus clients globally today and are known in our industry for very hands-on service and training, helping our customers really get an understanding of how to leverage marketing automation platforms and all the different things that they can do from a lead management standpoint for their organizations. Again, my name is Kevin Miller. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer with Salesfusion, and it is our pleasure to speak with you this afternoon. The hypothesis for today's session, we'd like to set this out in the beginning because we will be touching on a number of these concepts as we go through today's presentation. The first is that there have been radical changes in buyer lifecycle, and the advent of the social web has rendered cold calling much less effective in today's self-service buy cycle, and we will go into these concepts in quite a bit of depth. Calling into lists of suspects based on one-dimensional criteria, demographics, essentially wastes valuable selling time and causes leads to actually fall through the cracks of the top of your funnel. That is the perspective from which we're going to be discussing all of the different topics in today's session. So briefly, when we talk about cold calling or we talk about lead management in general, is this death of cold calling or is it evolution of cold calling? And what does lead generation in 2013 and 14 look like? There's this notion of what we call hijacking the digital conversation. So we want to, of course, talk about what has occurred in the last 3 years about how people buy products today and services online and how they are effectively self-selling and how that has caused us to lose control, if you will, from a sales perspective, the information dissemination that used to be controlled by our sales team. The statistical failure of cold calling, when we talk about the cost of goods sold or we talk about adding costs to the sales cycle, we'll talk about some statistics around that probably support very firmly that cold calling adds a significant amount of unnecessary cost to prospecting. We want to talk about where leads originate from and how we adapt sales and marketing to optimize this quote-unquote digital conversation that's occurring in how people buy and evaluate products and services today. And then talk a little bit about this whole journey to lead to sales revenue management, how we can move away from having marketing operating in a silo, disconnected from sales, disconnected from the CRM system, and bring those two together so that they are focused on revenue as opposed to generating lots of opens and clicks to emails, etc. And then changing view of how telesales, inside sales, telephone sales roles, how we should view those going forward as those roles definitely evolve and change as we move forward with more technologies and changes in how people buy. So firstly, when we talk about why cold calling has become much less effective than it has been in the past, the first thing we have to understand is not what's happened to people making phone calls per se, but we have to understand what has happened with how people buy. And if we look at this from an awareness, consideration, and then a purchase point of view, this used to be a much straighter line in years past. People would come in, they would search, they would discover information about you in this awareness phase, and they would typically move to communicating directly with your sales team. And the sales team would influence a lot of what happens in this consideration phase. And effective salespeople would be very good at disseminating information at the right time, whether that's a product brochure, a white paper, an analyst paper, etc. And then they would move into the negotiation, the competitive review, the purchase decision itself, and then the contracts phase. So the bookends to this haven't really changed that much. Maybe the awareness side has changed quite a bit about how people discover who we are. The middle section has changed dramatically because what's happened is buyers are doing a lot of this on their own before they actively engage with a salesperson. And this self-directed selling, or self-directed buying, I should say, has stripped away a lot of the control from sales about how they disseminated information to prospects in the past. And salespeople who were very good and very effective and very successful at selling were very good and very effective and very successful at disseminating information to prospects to help influence their decision. That decision is being influenced in many different ways now. So when we look at what this self-directed engagement looks like, or the buyer journey, it begins with the web. People are finding you on the web. They're finding us in search. They're finding us in social networks, etc. That's the way it's supposed to work. That's the way the web was designed to work, and that's the way our marketing teams have reacted to the evolution of the web by putting more and more information out there. Now, what's different is that people are doing much more social evaluations online today. And those social evaluations can occur in LinkedIn, in groups, checking tweets, checking your Facebook page, etc. There's been research done, hard research done by Serious Decisions, which is an analyst firm that focuses quite a bit on lead to revenue, inside sales, telesales, telemarketing, marketing automation. They found in some of the research studies where they polled product buyers that 70% of their cycle may be complete by the time they ever get in touch with a live salesperson. And they've completed a lot of that opinion forming on their own. And when I give this presentation in a face-to-face environment, in a luncheon or something along those lines, I'll typically ask folks in the room, how many of your companies have a Facebook page? And most of the folks will raise their hand and we'll say, well, what information is on that Facebook page? And folks will typically say, oh, it's pictures of our company, it's more casual type things that we put on our Facebook page. And I've always likened your Facebook presence is kind of a look inside the culture of your company. And there's a reason that companies do that, and that is this: because this buy cycle is happening online, we want to project the type of company we are, our culture. Are we a fun culture? Are we a very serious scientific culture? What is the culture of our company? We project that out into our Facebook page oftentimes because we want people to quote-unquote get to know us, because guess what? They're going to get to know us whether we want them to or not. It's how we can put ourselves out there in a way that we can help influence their perception of our company. So oftentimes that's the purpose of a Facebook page. And a lot of people would agree that you're trying to show people the behind-the-scenes look at your company, so to speak. Do you want to do business with me? Are we a fun company to do business with, etc.? So that really ties well into how people are using social networks to evaluate companies. Finally, we engage with salespeople. The issue with this is that by the time a prospect is engaged with sales, a large portion of their opinion of your company may very well already be formed, and it may be even more difficult to change, especially if somebody's doing a direct comparison against you and competitors, etc. So what's really important about all this is we have to understand, first of all, and accept that this is happening. If you don't believe that, then this is probably the wrong presentation for you to be in, because it most certainly is happening. Two, we have to accept the fact that our salespeople are not in as much control as we'd like them to be. And as marketers, what our job should be is to try and not force, but encourage human-human interaction earlier in this self-evaluation cycle. And that's oftentimes what we're using marketing automation systems for, to number one, identify who's interacting on the web, who's interacting in social networks, and number two, how can we intelligently engage our salespeople with those folks online so that we're putting ourselves back into this orange box where we really don't exist right now. So when we think about this buyer journey and how it's become self-paced, and we think about this in the context of cold calling, logic itself would dictate that if buyers are self-evaluating, that sales must make many, many more calls to find out who's actively evaluating. So the opposite may be true though, because there's just an inherent lack of efficiency in cold calling. Oftentimes the lack of efficiency in cold calling is the lack of data. Most of the time when we have a cold calling list, what do we have? Name, title, phone number, company name, maybe some industry information, etc. We have some basic demographic information that we can work on. What we don't have is any behavioral data. So how can you make an intelligent cold call and try and put yourself out there into that digital conversation if you don't have any of that information? So the lack of that information leads us to have bigger lists to call into. Cold calling to find active self-paced buyers is not scientific, and it wastes a lot of potential good selling time. The good selling time being talking to the people who are actively evaluating in that self-directed buy cycle. If there's only so many people who can be out there actively searching right now, how many phone calls do we have to make to find them? And how often do we actually get somebody live on the phone the first hit? So we're going to get into some discussions around some of these statistics, which even make this a little bit more of a dire situation when it comes to telesales. Inefficiencies in cold calling are going to add to your CAC, your cost to acquire customers, which is an extremely important metric for many companies to measure. And if you're continuously having to buy more lists, hire more telesales people, fire telesales people for not meeting their quotas, hire more telesales people, etc., you're adding inefficiency and cost to your overall operations as a company, none of which is a good thing. So when we think about what are people doing when they self-evaluate? They're gathering information. And pre-web, before internet, AD or BC, we'll call it BC, the sources of information that people use to make a buying decision were predominantly your salespeople. And then Web 1.0 came along, and then it was Google and your website, your corporate website. In that age, when Google first came out, your competition is one click away philosophy came about, so we had to get smart at figuring out how people can find us online. Our websites, which at the time were probably nothing more than digital versions of our pitch book or our media kit, were very static. Now today, in the social web, people are using peers, experts, your customers, your website, etc., in addition to the other pieces, to not only just find basic information about you, but to figure out what kind of company you are. Do I want to do business with you? Right? And if we look at what the buyers would know in advance at each one of these stages, in pre-web, they had some basic brand perception and product info, and then your salespeople would fill in the blanks. In Web 1.0, they had brand perception, some features, benefits, alternatives, and comparisons, and your salespeople would get into their competitive posture, and they would then, attempt to, rule out the competition and educate the buyer throughout the rest of the cycle. In the social web, people are coming in with customer opinions, reputations, comparisons, alternatives, pricing. Oftentimes, we're putting pricing on the website today when that would be unthinkable a few years ago. So you've got prospects who are coming in armed with a lot more information that you don't control, oftentimes information that you didn't even create. So if we want to just sit back and hope that all works out well, great. If your stuff is that good, if your content is that good, and there are certainly business models which are driven off of that, then you'll do well. If you don't 100% want to rely on the web and the social web to sell for you, then you've got to think long and hard about how we want to get our salespeople re-engaged online. And not all of this can be addressed by marketing automation. Some of this may need to be addressed by retraining of salespeople and how to use social networks effectively, particularly LinkedIn. So there's other considerations at work here other than just marketing automation technology, which is, of course, our world, so we tend to talk a lot about that, but there are other considerations which companies should definitely consider, and one of those I think that's valuable is LinkedIn training. Then there's the whole notion of cold calling is kind of icky, right? That's the best term that we can kind of come up with it. And there's definitely some psychology in play here with cold calling. Not a lot of people like to cold call. in 25 years of being involved in marketing and lead generation, etc., I haven't met a lot of salespeople in that time that really enjoy the practice of cold calling. Part of the reason is that cold calling involves you taking something from a person. You're taking their time, okay, without asking for it first. And even some cold calls, would begin with, can I have 5 minutes of your time, to tell you about our solution or to tell you how I think our solution could help you. When you look at what cold calling scripts look like, and I've looked at many over the years and written many over the years, most of it involved asking permission to take time from the prospect. That's how you begin the relationship. And that's a bad way to begin a relationship. Primarily because, number one, most people feel uncomfortable taking something from someone. Here we are, it's coming up on Christmas. It's better to give than receive, right? The same holds true for salespeople. They would much prefer to give than to receive because they're smart enough to know that when you give something, you'll get something in return, which is typically a contract. So salespeople are always much more comfortable and happy giving something rather than taking something. The other thing it does is it immediately places you in a subservient role to the buyer throughout the remainder of the relationship. When you're seen as a taker of time, if you will, rather than an educator and a giver of information, that's pretty much how you're going to be perceived throughout the rest. Makes negotiating with the buyer harder towards the end. If you could start on a more even keel with a prospect, you can have a much more productive relationship with them throughout the entire buy cycle. But when you begin that relationship in a subservient role as seller taking time from buyer, it's hard to get out of that. So there's a few statistics. 44% of sales reps quit after one no. And I don't mean quit their jobs, although I'm sure some do. But they quit meaning that they move on to another prospect. If a prospect says no, and a no could not necessarily mean, no, I don't want to buy your software. It could be, no, I don't have time for a demo. No, I don't have time for a meeting. No, I don't have time to look at your contract. There's going to be many, 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 many no's throughout a sales cycle. 60% of customers will say no to you at least 4 times throughout a buy cycle. 44% of reps are going to quit after 1, 22 after 2, 14 after 3, 12% after 4, for a total of 92%. So what you have is that 92% of sales reps will basically quit the sales cycle before a customer, on average, goes over their normal times they say no. In other words, the vast majority of your sales reps are going to quit before they should, so to speak. And again, I want to classify this. We don't mean quit by meaning they just walk away. Quit meaning they believe that because they're hearing no multiple times, this prospect's not going to buy, therefore I'm going to go on to somebody else. So it's important to make that distinction. So whenever we do our Death of Cold Calling presentation, we try to get as much updated statistics from the industry as possible to obviously support what we're saying. So there's been a recent one done by the Keller Research Center at Baylor University in Texas. This was just this past year, and they did a very extensive research study on cold calling. And what they did was they monitored over 6,000 calls that were made by very experienced and seasoned telemarketers, and they monitored the results closely. 72% of the calls ended swiftly with no further contact. So right off the bat, 72% of the people that they made contact with, just the people they made live contact with, ended with no further. 28% were labeled as useful because they did not hang up immediately. There were then follow-ups done on the 28% that were considered useful. And of that, 19 appointments were made. And from the 19 appointments, which came out of 6,200 calls, 4 of them became sales, which is about a 0.6% response rate. On the original total call was 6264. So 0.6% efficiency. Now, when you think about that, that's getting into direct mail territory. Direct mail has 1 to 2% response rate. Direct response TV has a 0.5 percentage point to 1% response rates. This is where we don't talk about cold calling in the sense that it's just not good to talk to somebody anymore. We talk about it just from a pure cost and efficiency standpoint. Not a lot of people have 100,000 names at their disposal to call on. Many people are scraping together lists the best way they can. They're acquiring lists here and there, etc. Think of how many names you're going to have to buy to reach your quota if cold calling was your primary method of lead generation. Now, realize that cold calling is not the primary lead generation methodology at most companies, but it can be a significant part. And oftentimes there's this perception, and I still hear it today, and it still makes me kind of cringe a little bit when I hear this. You know, you'll hear a sales manager, who's missing their number say, our salespeople need to just bang the phones. Okay, so basically what you're doing is our salespeople have to engage in a ridiculously inefficient exercise that has a low probability of success in order to achieve their goals. That's how it should be phrased. So whenever we get upset with sales and whenever we think sales isn't doing their job, rather than say sales needs to hit the phones, we need to say, sales, you need to engage in a ridiculously inefficient exercise that has a high probability of failure in order to meet your objectives, and see what the response on that's going to be, because that's basically what we're asking our salespeople to do. That's not to say salespeople should not be on the telephone. We think there are more efficient ways that we can put people on the telephone with sales that will result in more sales and more conversions. So I want to be very clear about that. A few other statistical failure rates that are worth noting. 2% of sales are made on the first contact, 3% are made on the second, 5% are made on the third, 10% are made on the fourth, 80% are made on the 5th to 12th contact. We think of nurture marketing very similar. In marketing, we have these new tools that allow us to build these great content-driven nurture marketing campaigns that are, continuously touching somebody over and over again with relevant content. When we build those campaigns in marketing, we assume that we're going to probably need to hit these folks 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times before we elicit a meaningful response, meaning they raise their hand and say, okay, I'm ready to talk to you. So we actually assume this in marketing. Sales oftentimes won't assume this, and many will walk away from a lead when it gets to the point where they've tried them a dozen times and they either don't answer or they can't take their call or this or that, et cetera, et cetera. So you'll have, sales just kind of pinging somebody for the 5th time and then they just kind of go away. Well, that person's never going to call me back, so let me move on to the next one. Oh, this person, I tried them 6 times, is never going to call me back, so let me move to the next one, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when you think about that in the context of the previous slide, when we talked about the combination of reps who quit a prospect after 1, 2, 3, 4 no's, and we factor in that it takes this many times to get somebody communicating with you to buy, the statistics really just aren't in favor of cold calling. You think about it from this perspective, from a funnel perspective, it may take 8.4 dials to reach a person, and of that, only on average 2% of all connects result in a meeting. Not a sale, a meeting. If 30% of the first meetings convert into opportunities and a salesperson closes 25% of their opportunities on average, you have to make over 1,000 phone calls to get one sale. And if you're pounding the phone, making 50, 60 calls a day, etc., you can get one winnable sale every 20 days or 12.5 new customers per year. So these were other statistics that were done in heavily intensive telesales environments. And when people were setting quotas, they would be setting quotas at 30 to 40 new deals per year. But when they actually run the mathematics behind it, what they end up finding is that it becomes statistically impossible to hit your quota, and that quotas were set much too high. So we have to change. And we have to adapt as companies. We have to adapt as sales organizations. We have to adapt as marketing organizations. A great quote is from Darwin, is that not the strongest of the species survives or the most intelligent. It's the ones that are most adaptable to change that survive. In today's world and business environment, I don't think that statement could be any better or more apt for what we have to deal with in today's business environment. Whether you're dealing in highly regulated environments, whether you're dealing in highly social environments, technology changes, etc., we have to be able to position ourselves to be able to consistently change how people buy, has changed. If we don't adapt how we sell has changed, do you think you're going to be successful long term? The answer to that is a resounding no. We know this because we talk to people dozens of times every day who need help. They're taken back by how quickly the changes have occurred and how people buy and what social media has done to their businesses, and they just don't know what to do because they were taken off guard by all this. Competitive landscapes are changing dramatically. Selling dynamics are changing. Information dissemination is changing, and business communication as a whole is changing. The time it took me to read those 5 bullets, 20 million emails have been sent globally. 20 million. In the time it'll take to get through this PowerPoint presentation, 6 billion emails will have been sent. How we communicate in business has changed radically and dramatically. So think of that as we go through the rest. So the companies that are adapting well, the ones that are being very successful, are those that have realized that marketing and sales cannot exist in separate funnels. There can't be a lead funnel and then some abyss and then a sales funnel. The two have to exist together. Marketing is very much involved in the upper part of the funnel, but much deeper than they have been in the past. So you have identification, capture, qualify. Basically, marketing goes much deeper than they used to. There was a time when marketing were the folks who existed up here, who did the ads, the trade shows, etc. Today, marketing is deep in the funnel, handling leads, directing leads to go to the right salespeople, nurturing leads, pre-qualifying leads, remarketing stale leads. Sales, much more focused around completing the qualification process, presenting and proposing the solutions, dealing with the competitive pressures, proposing pricing, executing contracts, closing business, and cross-selling. Those are the things when you think about what a modern sales rep should look like. They should be able to excel at these bullet points. And we shouldn't have sales focused a huge portion of their time on what is a grossly inefficient practice of calling into demographic lists. When we think about who's responsible for the pipeline, Forrester did a study recently, and they looked at what percentage of the pipeline should marketing be responsible for. And they said on average, marketers are generating about 40% of the sales pipeline. Now, Forrester's opinion on this, and I happen to agree with it, was that's grossly low. Marketing should really be producing in about the 75 to 80 to 90% range of a pipeline today. Ultimately, 100% responsible for it. At Salesfusion, we probably look at about 90 to 95% of the pipeline in the funnel falls on marketing. It's a lot of responsibility. You're essentially, as a marketer, almost 100% responsible for the revenue engine of the company. It didn't used to be viewed that way. And B2B companies in particular, marketing was almost not part of the revenue equation. They did the fun things, the cute things, the ads, the images, the giveaways at the trade show. Marketing is deeply in the trenches, deeply responsible and accountable for revenue, more so than they ever have been in the past. And what does this look like? Well, if we can look at this graphically and oversimplify it, what this ultimately looks like is as follows. Marketing is going to push lots and lots of content out on the web, produce lots and lots of campaigns, whether those campaigns are social or PPC or email or webinars or white papers or infographics or this, that, or the other thing, which are ultimately going to bring people back in to our funnel, typically through our website. So we bring those leads back in through our website, and ultimately what occurs is they hit the marketing automation system. Think of the marketing automation system in a company as the system that sits behind the website but in front of the CRM system. And essentially what it's going to do is it's going to look at, cookie, identify, analyze all that inbound traffic coming to you. And it's going to make some intelligent decisions based on rules that have been set by both sales and marketing to say, what is an SQL, sales qualified lead, and what is an MQL, a marketing qualified lead. What the definition of each will vary company by company, But to oversimplify it, a sales qualified lead is someone that's had enough activity and the right demographics to warrant a telephone call from a salesperson. An MQL is somebody that has been validated as being real. The email address works. They are who we think they are. And they've had some initial contact with us that warrants more information dissemination on our part. Great example. Somebody comes in, they download a white paper about healthcare on your website. You have 3 verticals: healthcare, finance, and manufacturing. Well, we want to then nurture them along for a while with additional healthcare information to see if they continue to respond, continue to download more stuff, more stuff, more stuff. If they do those things, then they will score up to an SQL, and we will move them over to the CRM system, and sales will pick that lead up and work that lead. Now they're going to work it and advance that lead, or that lead is going to stall. That's the second block on the left. The SQA, sales will advance it, and it's either going to advance to the opportunity stage and either be won or lost, or it's going to stall. The most frequent scenario is that a rather large percentage of SQLs will stall. And stall's not a bad thing. Stall just means that the deal hasn't closed yet. Now, stall could be a bad thing in the sense that the prospect stops communicating with sales. They stop returning phone calls, etc. In which case, we then have to drop them back into the marketing system and typically put them into some kind of a long-term nurture marketing campaign where we're not hitting them too much, but we're hitting them enough that we're keeping our name in front of these people. Because in their day-to-day lives, they simply just may not be ready yet to get into a full-blown evaluation. They may be very well interested in us, but they simply may not be ready to take that next step. And it should look something like this. It should be cyclical. We are continuously nurturing MQLs until sales engages with them because there's been enough activity, and then there'll be some adjustments made as to whether or not these leads are truly qualified or not based on scoring, which will then get field sales engaged, and they're either going to close the deal or we're going to recycle them and adjust and move them back to the beginning of the process. Lead management is a combination of CRM and marketing automation that has workflow and rules built into it that takes into consideration all the things that could potentially happen during a sales cycle and how we react to those things. And some things we can react to with technology and nurture campaigns, and some things we can't. Some things require human interaction. And the funny thing is that human interaction, telephone interactions have become kind of quaint. You know, with all the other communication mediums that we use today, a telephone call is kind of quaint. And when you do have a live interaction with somebody on the phone, that's a valuable, extremely valuable interaction. And we want to, as marketers, again, try to encourage good phone calls between prospects and our salespeople. We want good quality phone time because those interactions are the type that end up closing deals. And let me explain to you how this works against you when you don't have both of the technologies finely tuned, the CRM and marketing automation. You know, marketing's goal in everything they do is reach. They want to reach as many people as they can with their message. Sales is to deal with only the people that have a desire to be sold. So what happens is marketing tends to push a lot of people into the top of the funnel. They get bottlenecked here. Sales, you know, they may have pushed 1,000 leads to sales. Sales can't possibly process that many leads. So what sales does is they cherry pick. It's just a natural thing that all salespeople do. Oh, I know this company, or I know so-and-so at that company, or I've dealt with that company in the past life. So what they do is they cherry pick the companies that they believe, on first glance, that they can do business with. And what happens, like any plumbing system, where there's a clog, there's a leak, right? So as all these leads tend to jam up at the desire phase, some will leak out the bottom and go to a competitor because maybe they weren't ready to buy at that particular moment. They didn't fill out a form saying, I want to buy from you. But they would have been receptive to a call, and maybe it would have been a longer sales cycle or something like that. But they simply leak out, and they go to a competitor. So marketing automation is really designed to fix this problem. And this problem exists in almost every company that we've ever dealt with here at Salesfusion. And as you know, years as a consultant in the field, dealing with companies who had problems like this, I've seen this problem. Forrester did a fantastic job of visualizing the problem I've seen at so many companies. Well, marketing automation first fixes this in that we allow for the dissemination of lots of different types of content, and we cast a wide net. Because when you think about, all the fish in the sea, so to speak, only a handful of those fish are actively looking to buy. And the best way to catch one of those fish is to cast a big net. So marketing automation gives you a very big net to cast. It gives you the way to execute many different kind of campaigns, social, email, events, which gives you a better chance of engaging with those people who are evaluating, the people in the self-selling mode, if you will. So that's number one. Number two, it allows us to then analyze the leads that are coming in as a result of these campaigns. It allows us to look at the strength of engagement, what the buying signals are, and what the lead score history is. The screen that's up is actually a screen that's pulled from our system, which is showing how we build lead scoring. And it's interesting to note because what we do is we look at when people hit a certain page on our website. What page on your website is really high value that you want to know when people go to that website, that web page on your site a lot. Maybe it's your pricing page. Maybe it's your resource center. We use first-party cookies in the emails and the landing pages to identify individuals to the email address. And we watch when those people come to our website. What are they doing? What are they looking at? What kind of information are they disseminating or are they downloading? And then that tells us what information to give back to them. It also tells us at what point we should be engaging sales. When people click through from an email campaign, we're able to watch their behavior over time. And this is a common screen that we deploy inside of the CRM systems, which is meant to give sales a visual cue to say, geez, this person is really interested in us or they're stalking us, one or the other. Because week in and week out, they continue to come back to our website and they continue to look at these pages on our website. You will not find a salesperson who will ever think that that's bad information to have. They will always think that that's just fantastic information to have. When you could tell a sales rep, here's a lead, we think it's hot because they spent 33 minutes and 10 seconds on our pricing page today. I guarantee you a sales rep will agree with you that they think that that's a hot lead and they will want to call them immediately. And we deliver this information typically natively inside of the CRMs that we integrate with so that salespeople don't have to think about another application. They just push a button and they see this at the contact record. But in order to tell them which record to go into, what we're typically doing is we're alerting them ahead of time. And usually these alerts are set up in the marketing system. So what we'll do oftentimes is we'll see when a lead scores up to a certain level, and we'll go over here and we'll pop an alert to the salesperson. And we could take all kinds of actions against leads once we identify, number one, who they are, number two, what have they done, number three, what content are they interested in. And we could take these automated actions against them. Sometimes it's going to be putting into a nurture campaign. Sometimes it's going to be pushing that lead to CRM and alerting the sales team. Ultimately, lead alerts are typically triggered via email, and it's like an HTML email that winds up in someone's Outlook or Gmail. What it's doing is it's meant to send a synopsis of relevant details to sales. It's tied to scoring so that we're not sending one of these alerts to sales every time an individual hits our website. We only send them when an individual has enough activity that we think it's important that sales engage with this person. So think of it this way, because it's a lot of information to kind of compute at one time. Marketing and sales are going to sit down and say, what are the 10 things that you want us to look for? And when someone does those 10 things, you want to talk to them. You'll put that into a lead scoring model. When those 10 criteria are met, we send an alert. The sales rep gets it on their iPhone. They can go in and see the actual activity down to the page level detail. So the sales rep can then pick up the phone and not necessarily call in with a heavy breathing, say, I noticed you're on my website today, I'm stalking you, blah, blah, blah. But what they can do is they can call and say, hey, we noticed that, you had, responded to a campaign. I wanted to call up and see if you got the information you were looking for. And I wanted to tell you about a new research report that we have available, and I wanted to share that with you. Is it okay that I share that with you? That interaction which oftentimes can maybe stop right there, begins a relationship with a prospect by you giving them something, by you being a giver of knowledge rather than a taker of time. We continuously poll our customers, our users. There's a lot of research on this. When you start a telesales relationship that way with somebody, it's going to be a better relationship. It's going to cause for better interactions with a prospect. The prospect's not going to view you as a pestering salesperson. They're going to view you as a giver of information. All salespeople, modern selling, solution selling, Miller Hyman, etc., all want salespeople to be trusted advisors. It's hard to be trusted advisors when you start by taking something from somebody. You know, trusted advisor is someone that you go to for information. So when you begin the relationship with a prospect by giving them something, and oftentimes we being the marketing automation system, give sales enough information that they can do that effectively, then it's easier for you to become that quote-unquote trusted advisor throughout the rest of the selling relationship. It's important that when we set up marketing automation and we set up CRM integration, that we create feedback loops. We always want to know if what we, marketing, is pushing into sales is correct. We always want to capture lead source codes, and we want to push those into CRM and then map those to the opportunities. We want to ensure that there's visibility into the key fields inside of the CRM system that marketing automation can read, like lead status. These things are super important. They're probably a little more granular for a webinar discussion, but they're worth mentioning. One of the keys to succeeding when you integrate marketing automation and CRM is, number one, being able to push lead source in the CRM, and then ensuring that that lead source remains unmodified as it moves through to opportunity stage. Number two is being able to see the lead status field in CRM so that sales can say, well, of all these A leads, hot leads, green leads we're sending SQLs into CRM, we can periodically check and see if we sent 1,000, what is the average status of those 1,000? Is it qualified, disqualified, open, not contacted, etc.? So the two systems really do need to communicate at multiple levels in order for marketing to validate their work and sales to validate theirs. This whole notion of sales alignment then comes into play. And you've got to sit down and think about, well, who owns lead gen? What does the handoff process look like? What's the hand back process look like? Most people don't deal with the hand back process. Marketing and sales should engage in regular meetings. They should regularly validate the data. And marketing, at least one person in marketing should always be on a sales pipeline call. So those are some advice for how marketing and sales can improve getting on the same page. Aberdeen Group tracks companies that outperform all the other companies in their same category, right? So if you're a food manufacturer, what are the top 10% food manufacturers revenue-wise? And they look at what information from marketing they integrate into their CRM systems. And web page visits is number one. Number one. Why? Because salespeople want that info. Salesperson wants to know who's on my website, how did they get there, what did they do when they got there. Extremely, extremely useful pieces of information that successful companies smartly work with. At the end of the day, to reiterate this, with marketing automation, you're going to push a lot of leads into the top of your funnel. You have to have that quote-unquote coffee filter sitting there in the middle between CRM. And you've got to filter down only the best leads to go to your sales team. Lead acceptance then is going to be super critical here, where sales will then change the disposition of a lead that you've sent them. And those that are, let's say, marked as nurtured or whatever, bounce back to marketing, and marketing continues to market to them. When integrated properly, the number of SQLs should be relatively small with high close rates. Because, in theory, sales is left to focus on closing rather than prospecting off of call lists. Companies that align their marketing and sales organizations, 80% of them are achieving their revenue goals. We don't have to read this bullet by bullet. This is from a benchmark study that we commissioned with a company called Demand Metric. We'll be happy to provide you with a copy of this report. It's very interesting data, to say the least. I believe that the most interesting piece of data is this, which is why it's in the PowerPoint presentation. 80% of companies that are quote-unquote aligned, marketing and sales, are achieving their revenue goals. And that makes perfect sense, because if marketing is 75, 80, 90% responsible for generating the pipeline, it stands to reason that those two departments should be pretty much glued at the hip. A couple of final thoughts as we come into the end. Human interaction via the telephone is increasingly valuable because fewer people engage in it. The social web cannot sell for you, and you must learn how to put sales personnel into the mix. Technology-assisted selling through marketing automation can and usually does have dramatic revenue implications. Sales and marketing alignment has quickly become a de facto state of success, not a nice to have for companies. So I want to take a pause, stop the recording.